Hello, everybody. If you're seeing the title of this video and you, for some reason, know what I previously said, then you know I was going to read Matthew. And sometimes, you say something, then you just get this nodding, why don't you do this? And I just do it. I'll take it as the Holy Spirit, even if it's not telling me to do it. And I just go, we'll just go and read Maccabees, first Maccabees today. Excuse me. We had a distinct weather change over the night, so you got some drainage. I apologize in advance. Okay, so I've read other what are they called? Deuterocanonical or something like that. I've read other books that are not included in the Protestant Bible. Maybe that's the easiest way to say it. But it seems like, at least via social media, Maccabees is like the big one that gives them, that just triggers them. I've read all of the books, and I don't think there's a problem with any of the Catholic canon books. So what's the issue? Well, I know according to Luther, he did not like Maccabees because in the second book, I've read both of them, there's praying to the dead, which implies purgatory. So you have two issues that Luther sees there: praying to the dead and purgatory. Okay. Also, here's a reason the Maccabees would be seen as canonical. Maybe I should have had this written down. I know what they are in my head, but I'm talking like a robot because I'm trying to say the right thing. Hanukkah is established in Maccabees, and Jesus attends a Hanukkah feast in the Gospel of John 10 to be specific. It is called, just in case somebody gets angry about it not being referenced as Hanukkah, it's referenced as the Feast of Dedication, which is a different term for the same thing. Okay, so there's other reasons that Protestants will say these books shouldn't be in. So some of it is it's like bad writing, and I mean, we're going to read it here in a second. I don't think that's the case. I've read all those books, and I think they're good writing. There's nothing that I'm like, oh, that contradicts the rest of Scripture. So, yeah, what else is there to say? The real truth is it was part of canon during the time of Jesus. After Jesus died, it didn't become part of it. It stopped being part of the Jewish canon. 1500 years later, Martin Luther doesn't like certain things about the Catholic faith, looks at the Jews and goes, hey, they got rid of those books. I don't like those books either. They have some things that I don't like. And then they got rid of them. He also wanted to get rid of certain New Testament books. So, it is what it is. The canon has always been something under scrutiny by certain people. So, it is what it is. Okay, let's get started. Let me I got some watermelon today. It's tasty. I almost forgot to pray. Name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord our God, we bless you. As we come together to ponder the Scriptures, we ask you in your kindness to fill us with the knowledge of your will, so that pleasing you in all things, we may grow in every good work. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay, so As usual, I am reading the Bible as a public display so that other people might get that nudging, and maybe start reading the Bible as well. This isn't something that I just started doing. Uh, and it's not a judgment on people that don't read the Bible. I didn't read the Bible in the past. I used to read it like sometimes and thought I knew it and all this sort of stuff. I just really don't feel now that I read it adequately in the same way that I should have been. And so, hey, I'm reading whole books because I started it and it works out good. Like, I feel like you get a lot out of it doing it that way. There's definitely different ways you can read the Bible, obviously, but to really learn, you have to actually learn what's in there. Then you can break it down and learn actual truths from it, if that makes sense. But you got to know the books to learn the books, if that makes sense. Reading the Bible and understanding scripture is a process. It's not something you just come out of and you're an expert. You got your entire life to fulfill that or whatever. It's something that you work towards. Exactly like gaining a great relationship with God. You just don't, oh, we're best friends. You work towards it, and you stumble, you ask him for help. It's a process. So here we go. I'm 7 minutes in, haven't even read anything yet. The one thing I will say, I'm going to put a time stamp at the end of the video so that people know when I start reading. These chapters are super long, all of them. So it looks like there's only 16 verses. You're like, oh, you'll get through that in like 2 hours. Like, look how many, 64. And that's like a shorter chapter. So we might only get to like 8. And I might be like, nah, brah, we're done. We're done. We'll see, though. Let's get to 8, then we'll see. Maccabees 2 is a lot better writing, in my opinion. I like the narrative, and the chapters are shorter. Okay, so let's get going. Maccabees chapter 1. After Alexander, the Macedonian, Philip's son, who came from the land of Kittim, had defeated Darius, king of the Persians and Medes, he became king in his place, having first ruled in Greece. He fought many battles, captured fortresses, and put the kings on the earth to death. He advanced to the ends of the earth, gathering plunder from many nations. The earth fell silent before him, and his heart became proud and arrogant. He collected a very strong army and won dominion over provinces, nations, and rulers, and paid him tribute, and they paid him tribute. But after all this, he took his bed, realizing that he was going to die. So he summoned his noblest officers, who had been brought up with him from his youth, and divided his kingdom among them while he was still alive. Alexander reigned 12 years when he died. So his officers took over his kingdom, each in his own territory. After his death, they put all the diadems, and so they put on diadems. And so their sons after them for many years multiplied evils on the earth. There sprang from these a sinful offshoot, Antiochus Epiphanes, son of King Antiochus, once a hostage at Rome. He became king in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks. So I think diadems is like an alternate word for like crown. Yeah. In those days, there appeared in Israel transgressors of the law, who seduced many, saying, let's go and make a covenant with the Gentiles, all around us, since we separated from them. Many evils have come upon us. The proposal was agreeable. Some from among the people promptly went to the king, and he authorized them to introduce the ordinances of the Gentiles. There, thereupon, they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem according to the Gentile custom. They disguised their circumcision and abandoned the holy covenant. They allied themselves with the Gentiles and sold themselves to wrongdoing. When his kingdom seemed secure, Antiochus undertook to become king of the land of Egypt and to rule over both kingdoms. He invaded Egypt with a strong force, with chariots, elephants, and cavalry, and with a large fleet, to make war on Ptolemy, king of Egypt. Ptolemy was frightened at his presence and fled, and many were wounded and fell dead. Their fortified cities in the land of Egypt were captured, and Antiochus plundered the land of Egypt. So I want to see what, I think it's Ptolemy. Yeah, it is. Ptolemy. There we go. After Antiochus had defeated Egypt in 143rd year, he returned and went up against Israel and against Jerusalem with a strong force. He insolently entered the sanctuary and took away the golden altar and lampstand for the light with all its utensils, the offering table, the cups and bowls, the gold censers and the curtain, the cornices and the golden ornament on the facade of the temple. He stripped it all off. And he took away the silver and gold and the precious vessels. He also took all the hidden treasures he could find. Taking all this, he went back to his own country. He shed much blood and spoke with great arrogance. And there was great mourning throughout all Israel. And the rulers and the elders groaned. Young women and men languished, and the beauty of the women faded. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, while the bride sitting in her chamber mourned. And the land quaked on account of its inhabitants, and all the house of Jacob was clothed with shame. 2 years later, the king sent the Messian commander to the cities of Judah and came to Jerusalem with a strong force. He spoke to them deceitfully in peaceful terms, and they believed him. Then he attacked the city suddenly in a great onslaught and destroyed many of the people in Jerusalem. He plundered the city and set fire to it, demolished its houses and its surrounding walls. And they took captive the women and children and seized the animals. Then they built up the city of David with a high, strong wall and strong towers, and it became their citadel. There they installed a sinful race, transgressors of the law, who fortified themselves inside it. They stored up weapons and provisions, depositing there the plunder they had collected from Jerusalem, and they became a great snare. The citadel became an ambush against the sanctuary, and a wicked adversary to Israel at all times. They shed innocent blood around the sanctuary. They defiled the sanctuary. Because of them, the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled away. She became the abode of strangers. She became a stranger to her own offspring, and her children forsook her. Her sanctuary became desolate as a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths to shame, her great honor to contempt. As her glory had been, so great was her dishonor. Her exaltation was turned into mourning. Then the king wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and abandon their particular customs. All the Gentiles confronted to the king command of the king, and many Israelites. I forgot to add the book. And many Israelites delighted in his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath. The king sent letters by messenger to Jerusalem and to the cities of Judah, ordering them to follow customs foreign to their land, to prohibit burnt offerings, sacrifices, and liberations in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbaths and feast days, to desecrate the sanctuary and the sacred ministers, to build pagan altars and temples and shrines, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals, to leave their sons uncircumcised, and to defile themselves with every kind of impurity and abomination, so that they might forget the law and change all its ordinances. Whoever refused to act according to the command of the king was put to death. In words such as these, he wrote his whole kingdom. He appointed inspectors over all the people. He ordered the cities of Judah to offer sacrifices, each city in turn. Many of the people who abandoned the law joined them and committed evil in the land. They drove Israel into hiding wherever places of refuge could be found. On the 15th day of the month of Kislev, in the year 145, the king erected the desolating abomination upon the altar of burnt offerings, and in the surrounding cities of Judah they built pagan altars. They also burned incense at the doors of houses and in the streets. Any scrolls of the law that they found, they tore up and burned. Whoever was found with a scroll of the covenant, and whoever observed the law, was condemned by death by royal decree. So they used their power against Israel, against those who were caught each month in the cities. On the 25th day of each month, they sacrificed on the pagan altar. That was over the altar of burnt offerings. In keeping with the decree, they put to death women who had their children circumcised, and they hung their babies from their necks, their families also, and those who had circumcised them were killed. But many in Israel were determined and resolved in their hearts not to eat anything unclean. They preferred to die rather than to be defiled with food or to profane the holy covenant, and they did die. And the very great wrath came upon Israel. About 8 minutes. There we go. Okay, so chapter 2. That's a pretty, I remember that chapter being really big, but it kind of drones on because it's so long. Maybe that's just me. Maybe the second reading, it's going to hit me better. That first one, though, is pretty. Maccabees 2 is better, in my opinion, because it tells specific stories about people that are truly gruesome. This one is more like the overarching king's story, if that makes sense. We're already 20 minutes in. Only read one chapter. In those days, Mattathias, son of John, son of Simon, a priest of the family of Jorib, left Jerusalem and settled in Modin. He had 5 sons: John, who was called Gadi; Simon, who was called Thiasi; Judas, who was called Maccabeus; Elziar, who was called Avron; and Jonathan, who was called Aphus. When he saw the sacrileges that were being committed in Judah and in Jerusalem, he said, "Woe is me! Why was I born to see the ruin of my people, the ruin of the holy city, to dwell there, as it was given into the hands of enemies, the sanctuary into the hands of strangers? Her temple has become like a man disgraced. Her glorious vessels carried off as spoils. Her infants murdered in her streets. Her use by the sword of the enemy. What nation was not taken its share of her realm, and laid its hand on her spoils? All her adornment has been taken away. Once free, she has become a slave. We see our sanctuary laid waste, our beauty, our glory. The Gentiles have defiled them. Why are we still alive? Then Mattathias and his sons tore their garments, put on sackcloth, and mourned bitterly. The officers of the king in charge of enforcing the apostasy came to the city of Modin to make them sacrifice. Many of Israel joined them, but Mattathias and his sons drew together. Then the officers of the king addressed Mattathias. You are a leader, an honorable and great man in this city, supported by sons and kindred. Come now to be the first to obey the king's command, as all the Gentiles and Judeans and those who were left in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons shall be numbered among the king's friends, and you and your sons shall be honored with silver and gold and many gifts. But Mattathias answered in a loud voice, although all the Gentiles in the king's realm obey him, so that they forsake the religion of their ancestors and consent to the king's orders, yet I and my sons and my kindred will keep to the covenant of our ancestors. Heaven forbid that we should forsake the law and the commandments. We will not obey the words of the king by departing from our religion in the slightest degree. As he finished saying these words, a certain Jew came forward in the sight of all to offer sacrifice on the altar in Modin, according to the king's order. When Mattathias saw him, he was filled with zeal. His heart was moved, and his just fury was aroused. He sprang forward and killed him on the altar. At the same time, he also killed the messenger of the king who was forcing them to sacrifice, and he tore down the altar. Thus he showed his zeal for the law, just as Phinehas did with Zimri, son of Salu. Then Mattathias cried out in the city, let everyone who is zealous for the law and who stands by the covenant follow me. Then he and his sons fled to the mountains, leaving behind in the city all their possessions. At that time, many who sought righteousness and justice went into the wilderness to settle there. They and their children, their wives, and their animals, because misfortunes pressed so hard on them. It was reported to the officers and the soldiers of the king who were in the city of David, in Jerusalem, that those who had flouted the king's order had gone out to secret refuge in the wilderness. Many hurried out after them, and having caught up with them, camped outside and prepared to attack them on the Sabbath. The pursuers said to them, enough of this, come out and obey the king's command, and you will live. But they replied, we will not come out, nor will we obey the king's command to profane the Sabbath. Then the enemy attacked them at once, but they did not retaliate. They neither threw stones nor blocked up their secret refuge. They said, let us all die in innocence. Heaven and earth are our witness that you destroy us unjustly. So the officers and soldiers attacked them on the Sabbath, and they died with their children, their wives, their children, and their animals to the number of 1,000 persons. When Mattathias and his friends heard it, they mourned deeply for them. They said to one another, if we all do as our kindred have done, and do not fight against the Gentiles for our lives and our laws, they will soon destroy us from the earth. So on that day they came to this decision. Let us fight against anyone who attacks us on the Sabbath, so that we may not all die as our kindred died in their secret refuges. Then they were joined by a group of Hizadonians. Hizadines. Let's see what a Hizadine is. Jewish group during the time of the Maccabean revolt. The Hizadines were mentioned 3 times in the Books of the Maccabees, and that's all it says, unless I click on something. That's good enough. We'll find out by the text. Mighty warriors of Israel, all of them devoted to the law, righteous men. That's my insertion, the righteous part. And all those who were fleeing from the persecutions joined them and supported them. They gathered an army and struck down sinners in their wrath and the lawless in their anger, and the survivors fled to the Gentiles for safety. Mattathias and his friends went about and tore down the pagan altars. They also forcibly circumcised any uncircumcised boys whom they found in the territory of Israel. They put to flight the arrogant, and the work prospered in their hands. They saved the law from the hands of the Gentiles and of the kings, and did not let the sinner triumph. When the time came for Mattathias to die, he said to his sons, "Arrogance and scorn have not grown strong. It is time for disaster and violent wrath. Therefore, my children, be zealous for the law and give your lives for the covenant of our ancestors. Remember the deeds that our ancestors did in their times, and you shall win great honor, an everlasting name. Was not Abraham found faithful in trial? And it was credited to him as righteous. Joseph, when in distress, kept the commandment, and he became master of Egypt. Phinehas, our ancestor, for his burning zeal, received the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. Joshua, for executing his commission, became a judge in Israel. Caleb, for bearing witness before the assembly, received an inheritance in the land. David, for his loyalty, received as a heritage a throne of eternal kingship. Elijah, for his burning zeal for the law, was taken up to heaven. Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, for their faith, were saved from the fire. Daniel, for his innocence, was delivered from the mouth of lions. And so consider this from generation to generation, that none who hope in heaven shall fail in strength. Do not fear the words of sinners, for their glory ends in corruption and worms. Ooh, I like that. I'm going to save that. Today exalted, tomorrow not to be found. They have returned to dust. Their schemes have perished. Children, be courageous and strong in keeping the law, for by it you shall be honored. Here is your brother Simon, who I know is a wise counselor. Listen to him always, and he will be a father to you. And Judas Maccabeus, a mighty warrior from his youth, shall be the leader of your army and wage the war against the nations. Gather about you all who observe the law and avenge your people. Pay back the Gentiles what they deserve and observe the precepts of the law. Then he blessed them, and he was gathered to his ancestors. He died in the year 146 and was buried in the tombs of his ancestors in Modin, and all Israel mourned him greatly. Maccabees chapter 3. Then his son Judas, who was called Maccabeus, took his place. All his brothers and all who had joined his father supported him, and they gladly carried on Israel's war. He spread abroad the glory of his people and put on his breastplate like a giant. He armed himself with weapons of war. He fought battles and protected the camp with his sword. In his deeds, he was like a lion, like a young lion roaring for prey. He pursued the lawless, hunting them out, and those who troubled his people were destroyed by fire. The lawless were cowed by fear of him, and all evildoers were dismayed. By his hand, deliverance was happily achieved. What's cowed mean? So like cower? Cause someone to submit. Yeah, so it's like, I guess it's like cower. By his hand, deliverance was happily achieved, and he afflicted many kings. He gave joy to Jacob by his deeds, and his memory is blessed forever. He went about the cities of Judah, destroying the renegades there. He turned away wrath from Israel. He was renowned to the ends of the earth, and gathered together those who were perishing. The Apollonius gathered together the Gentiles, along with a large army from Samaria, to fight against Israel. Then Judas learned of it. He went out to meet him and struck and killed him. Many fell wounded, and the rest fled. They took their spoils, and Judas took the sword of Apollonius and fought with the rest of his life. But Siron, commander of the Syrian army, heard that Judas had mustered an assembly of faithful men ready for war. He said, I will not make a name for myself and win honor in the kingdom. I will wage war against Judas and his followers, who have despised the king's command. And again, a large company of renegades advanced with him to help him take revenge on the Israelites. When he reached the ascent of Beth Horon, Judas went out to meet him with a few men. But when they saw the army coming against them, they said to Judas, how can we, few as we are, fight such a strong host as this? Besides, we are weak, since we have not eaten today. But Judas said, many are easily hemmed in by a few. In the sight of heaven, there was no difference between deliverance by many or by few. For victory in war does not depend upon the size of the army, but on strength that comes from heaven. With great presumption and lawlessness, they come against us to destroy us and our wives and children, and to despoil us. But we are fighting for our lives and our laws. He will crush them before us, so do not fear them. When he finished speaking, he rushed suddenly upon Siron and his army, who were crushed before him. He pursued Siron down the descent of Beth Horon into the plain. About 800 of their men fell, and the rest fled to the land of the Philistines. Then Judas and his brothers began to be feared, and dread fell upon the Gentiles about them. His fame reached the king, and the Gentiles talked about the battles of Judas. When King Antiochus heard these reports, he was filled with rage. So he ordered that all the forces of his kingdom be gathered, a very strong army. He opened his treasury, gave his soldiers a year's pay, and commanded them to be prepared for anything. But then he saw that this exhausted the money in his treasury. War always does that. Moreover, the tribute from the province was small because of the dissension and distress he had brought upon the land by abolishing the laws which had been in effect from of old. He feared that, as had happened once or twice, that he would not have enough for his expenses and for the gifts that he was accustomed to give with a lavish hand, more so than all previous kings. Greatly perplexed, he decided to go to Persia and levy tribute on those provinces, and so raise a large sum of money. He left Laius, a noble of royal descent, in charge of the king's affairs, so the Euphrates River to the frontier of Egypt, and commissioned him to take care of his son Antiochus until his return. He entrusted to him half of his forces and the elephants, and gave him instructions concerning everything he wanted done. As for the inhabitants of Judea and Jerusalem, Laius was to send an army against them to crush and destroy the power of Israel and the remnant of Jerusalem, and efface their memory from the place. He was to settle foreigners in all their territory and distribute their land by lot. The king took the remaining half of this army and set out from Antioch, his capital, in the year 147. He crossed the Euphrates River and went through the provinces beyond. What's Ephes mean exactly? I want to keep that. Put that over here. It means erase from a surface. Okay. I can get rid of that. Get rid of that. Okay. So we're on verse 38. Lysias told Ptolemy, son of Dormenes and Nicanor, and Gorgias, powerful men among the king's friends, and with them he sent 40,000 foot soldiers and 7,000 cavalry to invade and ravage the land of Judah according to the king's orders. Setting out with their whole force, he came and pitched their camp near Emos in the plain. When the merchants of the region heard of their prowess, they came to the camp, bringing a huge sum of silver and gold, along with fetters to buy the Israelites as slaves. A force from Edom and from Philistia joined with them. Judas and his brothers saw that evils had multiplied and that armies were encamped with their territory. They learned of the orders which the king had given to destroy and utterly wipe out the people. So they said to one another, "Let us raise our people from their ruin and fight for them and for our sanctuary." The assembly gathered together to prepare for battle, to pray and ask for mercy and compassion. Jerusalem was uninhabited like a wilderness. Not one of her children came in or went out. The sanctuary was trampled on, and foreigners were in the citadel. It was a habitation for Gentiles. Joy had disappeared from Jacob, and the flute and the harp were silent. Thus they assembled and went to Mizpah near Jerusalem, because formerly at Mizpah there was a place of prayer for Israel. The day they fasted and wore sackcloth, they sprinkled ashes on their heads and tore their garments. They unrolled the scroll of the law to learn about things for which the Gentiles consulted the images of their idols. They brought with them the priestly garments, the first fruits, and the tithes, and they brought forward the Nazarites who had completed the time of their vows. And they cried aloud to heaven, "What shall we do with these? And where shall we take them? For your sanctuary has been trampled on and profaned, and your priests are in mourning and humbled. Now the Gentiles are gathered together against us to destroy us. You know what they plot against us. How shall we be able to resist them unless you help us?" Then they blew the trumpets and cried out loudly. After this, Judas appointed officers for the people, over thousands, over hundreds, over fifties, and over tens. He proclaimed that those who were building houses, or were just married, or were planting vineyards, and those who were afraid could each return home according to the law. Then the army moved off, and they camped to the south of Emos. Judas said, "Arm yourselves and be brave. In the morning, be ready to fight the Gentiles who have assembled against us to destroy us and our sanctuary. It is better to die in battle than to witness the evils befalling our nation and our sanctuary. Whatever is willed in heaven will be done." Chapter 4. I will say, while I don't like really long chapters, the second reading is way better than the first reading. I think I read this in the mornings. I just got up, probably just drinking my first coffee and reading it with my son. So it was completely different type of reading. I've been up half the day, and it's pretty an exciting reading. Now Gorgias took 5,000 infantry and 1,000 picked cavalry, and this detachment set out at night in order to fall upon the camp of the Jews in a surprise attack. Some of the citadel were his guides. Judas heard it and himself set out with his soldiers to attack the king's army at Emos, while these forces were still scattered away from the camp. During the night, Gorgias came into the camp of Judas and found no one there. He also sought them in the mountains, saying, "They are fleeing from us." But at daybreak, Judas appeared in the plain with 3,000 men. Furthermore, they lacked the helmets and swords they wanted. They saw the army of the Gentiles, strong, breastplated, and flanked with cavalry, and made up of experienced soldiers. Judas said to the men with them, "Do not fear their numbers or dread their attack. Remember how ancestors were saved in the Red Sea when Pharaoh pursued them with an army. Now, let us cry out to heaven in the hope that he will favor us. Remember the covenant with our ancestors and destroy this army before us today. All the Gentiles shall know that there is one who redeems and delivers Israel." When the foreigners looked up and saw them marching toward them, they came out of their camp for battle. The men with Judas blew the trumpet and joined the battle. They crushed the Gentiles who fled toward the plain. Their whole rear guard fell by the sword, and they were pursued as far as Gazara and the plains of Iadima and Azotus, and Jamina. Around 3,000 of their men fell. When Judas and the army returned from the pursuit, he said to the people, "Do not be greedy for plunder, for there is a fight ahead of us, and Gorgias and his army are near us on the mountain. But now stand firm against our enemies and fight them. Afterward, you can freely take the plunder." Now Judas was finishing this speech. A detachment appeared looking down from the mountain. They saw that their army had been put to flight and their camp was burning. The smoke they saw revealed what had happened. They realized this. They completely lost heart. And when they also saw the army of Judas in the plain ready to attack, they all fled to the land of the foreigners. Then Judas went back to plunder the camp, and they took much gold and silver, cloth dye blue and marine purple, and great treasure. As they returned, they were singing hymns and glorifying heaven. "Who is good, whose mercy endures forever." Thus Israel experienced a great deliverance that day. But those of the foreigners who had escaped went and told Lysias all that had occurred. When he heard it, he was disturbed and discouraged because things had not turned out in Israel as he intended and as the king had ordered. So the following year, he gathered together 60,000 men, picked men, and 5,000 cavalry to fight them. They came to Adima and camped at Beth Zur, and Judas met with them with 10,000 men. Seeing that the army was strong, he prayed thus: "Blessed are you, Savior of Israel, who crushed the attack of the mighty one by the hand of your servant David, and delivered the foreign camp into the hand of Jonathan, the son of Saul, and his armor bearer. Give this army into the hands of your people, Israel. Make them ashamed of their troops and their cavalry. Strike them with cowardice. Weaken the boldness of their strength, and let them tremble at their own destruction. Strike them down by the sword of those who love you, that all who know your name may sing your praise." Then they engaged in battle. About 5,000 of Lysias' army fell in hand-to-hand fighting. When Lysias saw the tide of the battle turning, and the increased boldness of Judas, whose men were ready either to live or to die nobly, He withdrew to Antioch and began to recruit mercenaries so as to return to Judea with greater numbers. Then Judas and his brothers said, "Now that our enemies have been crushed, let us go up to purify the sanctuary and rededicate it." So the whole army reassembled, went up to Mount Zion. They found the sanctuary desolate, the altar desecrated, and the gates burnt, weeds growing in the courts as in a thicket or on some mountain, and the priest chambers demolished. Then they tore their garments and made great lamentation. They sprinkled their heads with ashes and prostrated themselves. And when the signal was given with trumpets, they cried out to heaven. Judas appointed men to attack those in the citadel while he purified the sanctuary. He chose blameless priests devoted to the law. These purified the sanctuary and carried away the stones of the defilement to an unclean place. They deliberated what ought to be done with the altar for burnt offerings that had been desecrated. They decided it best to tear it down, lest it be a lasting shame to them that the Gentiles had defiled it. So they tore down the altar. They stored the stones in a suitable place on the Temple Mount until the coming of a prophet who could determine what to do with them. Then they took uncut stones according to the law and built a new altar like the former one. They also repaired the sanctuary and the interior of the temple and consecrated the courts. They made new sacred vessels and brought the lampstand, the altar of incense, and the table into the temple. Then they burned incense on the altar and lighted the lamps on the lampstand, and these illuminated the temple. They also put loaves on the table and hung up the curtains. Thus they finished all the work that they had undertaken. They rose early on the morning of the 25th day of the 9th month, that is, the month of Kislev, in the year 148. That's probably not even the end. And offered sacrifice according to the law on the new altar for burnt offerings that they had made. On the anniversary of the day on which the Gentiles had desecrated it, on the very day it was rededicated with songs, harps, lyres, and cymbals. All the people prostrated themselves and adored and praised heaven, who had given them success. For 8 days they celebrated the dedication of the altar and joyfully offered burnt offerings and sacrifices of deliverance and praise. They ornamented the facade of the temple with gold crowns and shields. They repaired the gates and the priest's chambers and furnished them with doors. There was great joy among the people now that the disgrace brought by the Gentiles was removed. Then Judas and his brothers and the entire assembly of Israel decreed that every year for 8 days, from the 25th day on the month of Kislev, the days of the dedication of the altar should be observed with joy and gladness on the anniversary. At that time, they built high walls and strong towers around Mount Zion to prevent the Gentiles from coming and trampling it as they had done before. Judas also placed a garrison there to protect it, and likewise fortified Beth Zur, that the people might have a stronghold facing Udima. Of course, we know, though, these high walls and strong towers, walls don't actually work. So that was a waste of time. That's called a joke. Chapter 5. When the nations round about heard that the altar had been rebuilt and the sanctuary restored as before, they were enraged. So they decided to destroy the descendants of Jacob who were among them, and they began to kill and eradicate the people. Then Judas attacked the Edomites at Acrabatane. That's as good as we're getting. Acrabatane. In Edema, because they were blockading Israel, he dealt them a heavy blow, humbled and despoiled them. He also remembered the malice of the Benaites, who had become a snare and a stumbling block to the people by ambushing them along the roads. He forced them to take refuge in towers which he besieged. He put them under the ban and burned down their towers along with all who were in them. I say the AEA, and I'm like, I can just hear like the do 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 do. Like I have nothing. How do you say that? I don't know. We'll just guess. Move on. Then they crossed over to the Ammonites, where he found a strong army and a large body of people with Timothy as their leader. He fought many battles with them, routed them, and struck them down. After seizing Jazer and its villages, he returned to Judea. The Gentiles in Gilead assembled to destroy the Israelites who were in their territory. These then fled to the stronghold of Dathamiah. They sent a letter to Judas and his brothers, saying, "The Gentiles around us have assembled against us to destroy us, and they are preparing to come and siege this stronghold to which we have fled. Timothy is the leader of their army. Come at once to rescue us from them, for many of us have fallen. All our kindred who were in the territory of the Tabiids have been killed. The Gentiles have captured their wives, their children, and their goods, and they have slain there about 1,000 men." While they were reading this letter, suddenly other messengers, have garments torn, arrived from Galilee to deliver a similar message, that the inhabitants of Ptolemais, Tyre, and Sidon, the whole of Gentile Galilee, have joined forces to destroy us. When Judas and the people heard this, a great assembly convened to consider what they should do for their kindred, who were in distress and being attacked by enemies. Judas said to his brother Simon, "Choose men for yourself and go. Rescue your kindred in Galilee. My brother Jonathan and I will go to Gilead." He left Joseph, son of Zechariah, and Azariah, leader of the people, with the rest of the army in Judea to guard it. He commanded them, "Take charge of these people, but do not join battle against the Gentiles until we return." 3,000 men were allotted to Simon to go into Galilee, and 8,000 men to Judas for Gilead. Simon went into Galilee and fought many battles with the Gentiles. They were crushed before them, and he pursued them to the very gate of Ptolemais. About 3,000 of the Gentiles fell, and he gathered their spoils. He took with him the Jews who were in Galilee and Arbatah, with their wives and children and all they had, and brought them to Judea with great rejoicing. Judas Maccabeus and his brother Jonathan crossed the Jordan and marched for 3 days through the wilderness. There they met some Nattabeans, who received them noticeably and told them all that had happened to their kindred in Gilead. Many of them were shut up in Bozrah, in Bozer, near Alamiah, in Shazpho, Maked, and Carnium. All of these are large fortified cities, and some are shut up in other cities of Galilee. Get up there. Get up there. And some of them are shut up in other cities of Galilee. Tomorrow, their enemies plan to attack the strongholds and to seize and destroy all these people in a day. Thereupon Judas suddenly changed direction with his army and marched across the wilderness of Bozrah and captured the city. He put every male to the sword and took all their spoils and set fire to the city. He led his army from that place by night, and they marched toward the stronghold. When the morning came, they looked ahead and saw a countless multitude with ladders and machines for capturing the stronghold beginning to attack. When Judas perceived that the struggle had begun and that the noise of the battle was resounding to heaven with trumpet blasts and loud shouting, he said to the men of his army, "Fight for our kindred today." He came up behind them with 3 columns, blowing their trumpets and crying out in prayer. When the army of Timothy realized that it was Maccabees, they fled before him and inflicted on them a great defeat. About 8,000 of their men fell that day. Then he turned toward Alamea and attacked and captured it. He killed every male, took spoils, and burned it down. From there he moved on and took Chaspho, Maked, and Bozer, and other cities in Galilee. After these events, Timothy assembled another army and camped opposite Raphon on the other side of the Wadi. Judas then sent men to spy on the camp, and they reported to him, "All the Gentiles around us have rallied to him, making a very large force. They have also hired Arabians to help them, and have camped beyond the Wadi, ready to attack you." So Judas went forward to meet them. As Judas and his army were approaching the following wadi, Timothy said to the officers of his army, "If he crosses over to us first, we shall not be able to resist him. He will certainly defeat us. But if we resist the camps on the other side of the river, we will cross over to him and defeat him." But when Judas reached the flowing wadi, he stationed the officers of the people beside it and gave them this order: "Do not allow anyone to encamp. We must all go into battle." He was the first to cross to the attack with all the people behind him, and all the Gentiles were crushed before them. They threw away their arms and fled to the temple enclosure at Carnium. But the Judas troops captured the city and burned the temple, and closed with all who were in it. So Carnium was subdued, and Judas met with no more resistance. Then Judas assembled all the Israelites, great and small, who were in Gilead, with their wives and children and their goods, a very large company, to go into the land of Judah. When they reached Ephron, a large and strongly fortified city along the way, they found it impossible to go around it on either the right or the left. They would have to march right through it. But the people in the city shut them out and blocked up the gates with stones. Then Judas sent them this peaceful message: "Let us cross your territory in order to reach your own. No one will harm you. We will only march through." But they would not open to him. So Judas ordered a proclamation to be made in the camp that everyone should take up positions where they were. When the men of the army took up their positions, he assaulted the city all that day and night, and it was delivered into his hand. He put every male to the sword, leveled the city, took spoils, and passed through it over the slain. Then they crossed the Jordan into the great plain in front of Beth Shean. And Judas kept gathering the stragglers and encouraging the people the whole way until he reached the land of Judah. He ascended Mount Zion in joy and gladness and sacrificed burnt offerings, because not one of them had fallen. They had returned in safety. In those days, when Judas and Jonathan were in the land of Gilead, and Simon, his brother, was in Galilee opposite of Ptolemais, Joseph, son of Zachariah, and Azariah, the leaders of the army, heard about the brave deeds and the fighting that they were doing. They said, "Let us also make a name for ourselves by going out and fighting against the Gentiles around us." They gave orders to those of their army who were with them and marched against Jamnia. But Gorgias and his men came out of the city to meet them in battle. Joseph and Azariah were routed and were pursued to the frontiers of Judea, and about 2,000 Israelites fell that day. It was a great setback for the people, because they had not obeyed Judas and his brothers. thinking that they would do brave deeds, but they were not of the family through whom Israel's deliverance was given. The valiant Judas and his brothers were greatly honored in all Israel and among all the Gentiles whenever their name was heard, and people gathered about them and praised them. Then Judas and his brothers went out and attacked the Edomites in the land toward the south. He took Hebron and its villagers, and he destroyed its strongholds and burned the towers around it. Then he set out for the land of the foreigners and passed through Marisa. On that day, some priests fell in battle who had gone out rashly to fight in their desire to do brave deeds. Judas then turned toward Azotus in the land of the foreigners. He destroyed their altars and burned the carved images of their gods. And after plundering their cities, he returned to the land of Judah. It's like good watermelon. Chapter 6. So we're an hour in. I probably could have had chapter 6 read if I would have started immediately. But I went on a long lecture, 8-minute lecture. Anyways, so we're roughly kind of halfway done. So it might take 2.5 hours, maybe 3. Let's just keep going. When we get to 8, we'll see where we're at. As King Antiochus passed through the eastern provinces, he heard that in Persia there was a city, Elam, famous for its wealth in silver and gold, and that its temple was very rich, containing gold helmets, breastplates, and weapons, left there by the first king of the Greeks, Alexander, son of Philip, king of Macedon. He went, therefore, and tried to capture the loot the city, but he could not do so because his plan became known to the people of the city, who rose up in battle against him. So he fled and in great dismay withdrew from there and returned to Babylon. While he was in Persia, a messenger brought him news that the armies had gone into the land of Judah had been routed, that Lysias had gone at first with a strong army and been driven back, that the people of Judah had grown strong by reason of the arms, wealth, and abundant spoils taken from the armies. They had cut down, that they had pulled down the abomination which had built upon the altar in Jerusalem, and that they had surrounded with high walls both the sanctuary as it had been before, and his city of Beth Zur. When the king heard this news, he was astonished and very much shaken, sick with grief because his designs had failed, and he took his bed. There he remained many days, assailed by waves of grief, for he thought he was going to die. So he called his friends and he said to them, "Sleep has departed my eyes, and my heart sinks from anxiety." He said to himself, "I said to myself, in what tribulation have I come, and in what floods of sorrow am I now? Yet I was kindly and beloved in my rule. But I now recall the evils I did in Jerusalem, when I carried away all the vessels of silver and gold that were in it, and for no cause gave orders that the inhabitants of Judah be destroyed. I know that this is why these evils have overtaken me, and now I am dying in bitter grief in a foreign land." Then he summoned Philip, one of his friends, and put him in charge of the whole kingdom. He gave him his diadem, his robe, and his signet ring, so that he might guide the king's son Antiochus and bring him up to be king. So King Antiochus died there in the 149th year. Then Dionysius learned that the king was dead. He set up the king's son Antiochus, whom he had reared as a child, to be king in his place, and he gave him the title Epatador. Upatador? That seems like something you need to look up. The title adopted by Hellenistic rulers. How do we say it, though? If I click on this, is it going to have it? No. Pronunciation. Putador. Putador? I don't know. Whatever. I don't like what the video said. Too lazy to go look anywhere else. Okay. Those in the citadel were hemming Israel in and around the sanctuary, continually trying to harm them and to strengthen the Gentiles. And so Judas planned to destroy them and assembled the people to besiege them. So in the 150th year, they assembled and besieged the citadel, for which purpose he constructed platforms and siege engines. But some of the besieged escaped, and some renegade Israelites joined them. They went to the king and said, "How long will you fail to do justice and to avenge our kindred?" He agreed to serve your father and to follow his orders and obey his edicts. And for this, our own people have become our enemies. They have put to death as many of us as they could find and have seized our inheritances. They have acted aggressively, not only against us, but throughout the whole territory. Look, today they have besieged the citadel in Jerusalem in order to capture it, and they have fortified the sanctuary in Beth Zur. Unless you act quickly and prevent them, they will do even worse things than these, and you will not be able to stop them. When the king heard this, he was enraged, and he called together his friends, the officers of his army, and the commander of the cavalry. Mercenary forces also came to him from other kingdoms and from the islands of the seas. His army numbered 100,000 foot soldiers, 20,000 cavalry, and 32 elephants trained for war. They passed through Idumea and camped before Beth Zur. For many days they attacked it, and they constructed siege engines, but the besieged made a sortie and burned these. And they fought bravely. I think sortie actually means like I remember writing that on one of my eval reports. An attack made by troops coming out from a position of defense. Yeah, it's the same word. Then Judas, they had a different definition, but it's essentially the same thing. Then Judas marched away from the citadel and moved his camp to Beth Zechariah, opposite the king's camp. The king, rising before dawn, moved his force hastily along the road to Beth Zechariah, and the troops prepared for battle and sounded the trumpet. They made the elephants drunk on the juice of grapes and mulberries to get them ready to fight. The beasts were distributed along the phalanxes, each elephant having assigned to it 1,000 men in coats of mail with bronze helmets on their heads and 500 picked cavalry. These accompanied the beast wherever it was. Wherever it moved, they moved and never left it. Each elephant was outfitted with a strong wooden tower fastened to it by a harness. Each tower held 3 soldiers who fought from it besides the Indian River. The remaining cavalry were stationed on one or the other of the 2 flanks of the army to harass the enemy, to be protected by the phalanxes. When the sun shone on the gold and bronze shields, the mountains gleamed with their brightness and blazed like flaming torches. Part of the king's army spread out along the heights, while some were on low ground, and they marched forward steadily in good order. All who heard the noise of their numbers, the tramp of their marching, and the clanging of the arms trembled, for the army was very great and strong. Judas with his army advanced to fight, and 600 men of the king's army fell. Elziar, called Averon, saw one of the beasts covered with royal armor and bigger than any of the others, and so he thought the king was on it. He gave up his life to save his people and win an everlasting name for himself. He dashed courageously up to it in the middle of the phalanx, killing men right and left, so they parted before him. He ran right under the elephant, stabbed it, and killed it. The beast fell on the ground on top of him, and he died there. But when Judas troops saw the strength of the royal army and the ardor of its forces, they retreated from them. Some of the king's army went up to Jerusalem to attack them, and the king established camps in Judea and at Mount Zion. He made peace with the people of Beth Zur, and they evacuated the city because they had no food there to enable them to withstand the siege, for that was a Sabbath year in the land. The king took Beth Zur and stationed a garrison there to hold it. For many days he besieged the sanctuary, setting up platforms and siege engines, flamethrowers, catapults, mechanical bows for shooting arrows and projectiles. The defenders countered by setting up siege engines of their own and kept up the fight a long time. But there were no provisions in the storerooms because it was the 7th year, and the reserves had been eaten up by those who had been rescued from the Gentiles and brought to Judea. Few men remained in the sanctuary because the famine was too much for them. The rest scattered, each to his own home. Lysias heard that Philip, whom King Antiochus, before his death, had appointed to train his son Antiochus to be king. He returned from Persia and Media with the army that accompanied the king, and he was seeking to take over the government. So he hastily decided to withdraw. He said to the king, "The leaders of the army and the soldiers, we are growing weaker every day. Our provisions are scanty, and the place we are besieging is strong. And it is our duty to take care of the affairs of the kingdom. Therefore, let us now come to terms with these people and make peace with them and all their nation. Let us grant them freedom to live according to their own laws, as formerly it was on account of their laws which we abolished, that they became enraged and did all these things." The proposal pleased the king and the leaders. He sent peace terms to the Jews, and they accepted. So the king and the leaders swore an oath on them, and on these terms the Jews evacuated the fortification. But when the king entered Mount Zion and saw how the place was fortified, he broke the oath that he had sworn and gave orders to tear down the encircling wall. Then he departed in haste and returned to Antioch, where he found Philip in control of the city. He fought against him and took the city by force. Chapter 7. In the 151st year, Demetrius, son of Seleucus, that's what we're going with, set out from Rome, arrived with a few men at a coastal city, and began to rule there. Yeah, I've learned with a lot of these words, these names and such, if you don't know the official pronunciation, it's better just to get one that you think looks right, Seleucus, and run with the continuity, right? I mean, who's to say it's wrong? Unless you say it at a conference or something, and then they all chuckle at you at your own expense. I mean, whatever. As, or if you say it online with nobody watching and somebody watches it later and laughs at you. As he was entering the royal palace of his ancestors, the soldiers seized Antiochus and Lysias to bring them to him. He was informed of this. He said, "Do not show me their faces." To the soldiers killed, so the soldiers killed them, and Demetrius assumed the royal throne. Then all the lawless men and renegades of Israel came to him. They were led by Alcimus, who desired to be high priest. They made this accusation to the king against the people. Judas and his brothers have destroyed all your friends and have driven us out of our land. So now send a man whom you trust to go and see all the destruction Judas has wrought on us and on the king's territory, and let him punish them and all their supporters. So the king chose Bacchides, one of the king's friends, who ruled the province of west of Euphrates, a great man in the kingdom and faithful to the king. He sent him and the renegade Alcimus, to whom he granted the high priesthood, with orders to take revenge on the Israelites. They set out on arriving in the land of Judah with a great army, sent messengers who spoke deceitfully to Judas and his brothers in peaceful terms. But these paid no attention to their words, seeing that they had come with a great army. Group of scribes, however, gathered about Alcimus and Bacchides to ask for just agreement. The Hasidians were the first among the Israelites to seek peace with them, for they said, "A priest of the line of Aaron has come with the army, and he will not do us any wrong." He spoke with them peacefully and swore to them, "We will not seek to injure you or your friends." So they trusted him. But he arrested 60 of them and killed them in one day, according to the words that he wrote. "The flesh of your faithful, and their blood they have spilled all along around about Jerusalem, and no one was left to bury them." Then fear and dread of them came upon all the people, who said, "There is no truth or justice among them." They violated the agreement and the oath that they swore. Bacchides withdrew from Jerusalem and camped in Beth Zaith. He had many of the men who deserted to him arrested, and some of the people. He killed them and threw them in the great cistern. He handed the province over to Alcimus, leaving troops to help him, while he himself returned to the king. Alcimus struggled to maintain his priesthood. And all those who were troubling the people gathered about him. And all those who were troubling the people gathered about him. They took possession of the land of Judah and caused great distress in Israel. When Judas saw all the evils that Alcimus and those with him were bringing upon the Israelites, even more than the Gentiles had, he went about all the borders of Judea and took revenge on the men who were deserted, preventing them from going out into the country. But when Alcimus saw that Judas and his followers were gaining strength and realized that he could not resist them, he returned to the king and accused them of grave crimes. Then the king sent Nicanor, one of his honored officers who was bitter enemy of Israel, with orders to destroy the people. Nicanor came to Jerusalem with a large force and deceitfully sent to Judas his brothers this peaceable message: "Let there be no fight between you and me and you. I will come with a few men to meet you face to face in peace." So he came to Judas, and they greeted one another peacefully. But Judas' enemies were prepared to seize him. When he became aware that Nicanor had come to him with deceit in mind, Judas was afraid of him and would not meet him again. When Nicanor saw that his plan had been discovered, he went out to fight Judas near Caphasalama, Caphasaramama. About 500 men of Nicanor's army fell, and the rest fled to the city of David. After this, Nicanor went up to Mount Zion. Some of the priests from the sanctuary and some of the elders of the people came out to greet him peacefully and show him the burnt offerings that was being sacrificed for the king. But he mocked and ridiculed them, defiled them, and spoke arrogantly. In a rage, he swore, "If Judas and his army are not delivered to me at once, when I return victorious, I will burn this temple down." He went away in great anger. The priests, however, went in and stood before the altar in the sanctuary. They wept and said, "You have chosen this house to bear your name, and to be a house of prayer and supplication for your people. Take revenge of this man and his army, and let them fall by the sword. Remember their blasphemies, and do not let them continue." Nicanor left Jerusalem and camped in Beth Horon, where the Syrian army joined him. But Judas camped in Adasa with 3,000 men. Here Judas uttered this prayer: "When they who were sent by the king blasphemed, your angel went out and killed 185,000 of them. In the same way, crush this army before us today, and let the rest of us know that Nicanor spoke wickedly against your sanctuary. Judge him according to his wickedness." The armies met in battle on the 13th day of the month of Adar. Nicanor's army was crushed, and he himself was the first to fall in the battle. When his army saw that Nicanor had fallen, they threw down their weapons and fled. The Jews pursued them a day's journey from Adasa to near Gazara, blowing the trumpets behind them as signals. From all the surrounding villages of Judea, people came out and outflanked them. They turned them back, and all the enemies fell by the sword. Not a single one escaped. Then the Jews collected the spoils and the plunder. They cut off Nicanor's head with his right arm, which they lifted up so arrogantly. These they brought and displayed in the sight of Jerusalem. The people rejoiced greatly, observed that day as a day of much joy. They decreed that it should be observed every year on the 13th of Adar, and so for a few days the land of Judah was at rest. Judas had heard the reputation of the Romans. This is chapter 8. They were valiant fighters and acted admirably to all who took their side. They established a friendly alliance with all who had applied to them, and he also told of their battles and brave deeds that they performed against the Gauls, conquering them and forcing them to pay tribute, and what they did in Spain to get possession of the silver and the gold mines there. By planning and persistence, they subjugated the whole region, although it was very remote from their own. They also subjugated the kings who had come against them from the far corners of the earth until they crushed them and inflicted on them severe defeat. The rest paid tribute to them every year. Philip and Perseus, king of the Macedonians, and the others who were opposed them in battle, they overwhelmed and subjugated. Antiochus, the great king of Asia, who fought against them with 120 elephants and with cavalry and chariots and a very great army, was defeated by them. They took him alive and obliged him and the kings who succeeded him to pay a heavy tribute, to give hostages, and to cede. Lycia, Mysia, and Lydia from among their best provinces. The Romans took these from him and gave them to King Anames. When the Greeks planned to come and destroy them, the Romans discovered it and set against the Greeks a single general who made war on them. Many were wounded and fell, and the Romans took their wives and children captive. They plundered them, took possession of their land, tore down their strongholds, and reduced them to slavery, even to this day. All the other kingdoms and islands that had ever opposed them, they destroyed and enslaved. With their friends, however, and those who relied on them, they maintained friendship. They subjugated kings both near and far, and all who heard of their fame were afraid of them. Those whom they wish to help and to make kings, they made kings, and those whom they wish they dispose, and they were greatly exalted. Yet with all this, none of them put on a diadem or wore purple as a display of grandeur. But they made for themselves a senate chamber, and every day about 320 men took counsel, deliberating on all that concerned the people and their well being. They entrust their government to one man every year to rule over the entire land, and they all obey that one, and there is no envy or jealousy among them. So Judas chose Elipolmus, son of John, son of Achos, and Jason, son of Elziar, and sent them to Rome to establish friendship and alliance with them. He did this to lift the yoke from Israel, for it was obvious that the king of the Greeks was subjecting them to slavery. After making a very long journey to Rome, the envoys entered the Senate chamber and spoke as follows: Judas, called Maccabeus, and his brothers with the Jewish people have sent us to you to establish alliance and peace with you, and be enrolled among the allies and friends. The proposal pleased the Romans, and this is a copy of the reply they inscribed on bronze tablets and sent to Jerusalem to remain there with the Jews as a record of peace and alliance. May it be well with the Romans and the Jewish nation at sea and on land forever. May sword and enemy be far from them. But if war is made on Rome or any of its allies in any of their dominions, the Jewish nation will fight along with them wholeheartedly as the occasion shall demand. And to those who wage war, they shall not give or provide grain, weapons, money, or ships, as seems best to Rome. They shall fulfill their obligations without receiving any recompense. On the same way, if war is made first on the Jewish nation, the Romans will fight along with them willingly on the occasion shall demand. And to those who attack them, there shall not be given grain, weapons, money, or ships, as seems best to Rome. They shall fill their obligations without deception. On these terms, the Romans have made an agreement with the Jewish people. But if both parties hereafter agree to add or to take away anything, they shall do as they choose, and whatever they shall add or take away shall be valid. Moreover, concerning the wrongings that King Demetrius is doing to them, we have written to him thus: Why have you made your yoke heavy upon your friends and allies, the Jews? If they petition against you again, you will introduce justice and make war by sea and land. Okay, we're at the halfway point. We're at basically an hour and a half. So I'm going to take a break real quick. I'll be right back. I'm kind of thinking about quitting because I have some stuff I need to do. All right. Sorry about that. Yeah. I was going to come back and finish, but I am going to run a marathon tomorrow, and I've been wanting to go get one of those Garmin watches. And I saw they had them at least advertised on the Walmart website. So I literally could have ordered one on Amazon like weeks ago. I've been wanting to go there for like a couple weeks, I believe, and now's the perfect time, right? Like I have the time right now. Go and do it. Get it done. You'll be ready tomorrow. You'll have it on your watch. Bada bing, bada boom. Anyways, we'll finish up the rest of Maccabees from 9 till 16. Uh, probably, probably Monday. So, then we'll be blazing right along. We might even go right into Maccabees 2. Maccabees 2 is shorter. I think it's only like maybe 11 chapters, and the chapters are not as long as these. So it is what it is. Let's pray. Thank God for this great reading. Actually, I did not like Maccabees 1 the first time I read it. This time it's about 1,000% more enjoyable. I'm not sure the reason why. I think I can't even comment on it. I'd just be making something up, right? Okay, let's do the blessing and get out of here. May God, the source of all patience and encouragement, enable us to live in perfect harmony with one another in the Spirit of Christ Jesus, with one heart and one voice. May we glorify God now and forever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I thank you guys for watching. We'll finish this up on, I said Monday. I'm like so out of it too. Like, I know I have all this stuff I need to do, but I'm sitting here trying to read a 3-hour book. Okay. You guys have a great day. Have a blessed day. Later.